Okay, let's come to the 18th century. The 18th century has various denominations, and it's not exactly the 18th century in England. Usually you say the time from the Glorious Revolution in 1688 up until 1780, those years when Romanticism gradually appears in England. So the Augustan age is also called Neoclassicism, the age of reason or enlightenment. It all depends on what aspect of culture you regard. Okay, more philosophical, then you would say the age of reason and enlightenment, or probably more literary, then you would call it the Augustan age or Neoclassicism. Okay, classicism is the time around the age of Emperor Augustus in Rome. So this means the time around the birth of Christ. Okay, so this means, if you call it the Augustan age, you refer to the aspect that artists, okay, predominantly writers, they took their role models from the time of Emperor Augustus in Rome. Okay, so referring back to the Augustan age, which means something like 15 years before and after the birth of Christ. Okay, so who were those chief literary models? And I just want to mention a few. When I say classical authors, I mean exactly those. Yeah, classical authors in terms of literary epoch means those authors which lived in Rome or Greece. The first one is Greek here. This is Homer. Homer, who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, the two most influential epics in world literature, probably together with the Aeneid, which is going to come next. Okay, so the Iliad is more or less an epic about the destruction of Troy, the Trojan War. Okay, when the Greeks besieged Troy for something like 10 years, then there is the sack of Troy, and Troy is in the end destroyed, okay, by the Greeks. This is the Iliad, the story of Achilles and Agamemnon, Menelaus and Paris and so on, Hector, okay, the chief names. The next epic after that is the Odyssey, okay, and the Odyssey recounts the story of Odysseus, one of the Greek heroes, okay, who wanted to find his way back to his Ithaca. This is where he comes from, to the island of Ithaca, which takes him 10 years as well, because he has an odyssey, okay? There's no other word, okay? An odyssey around the Mediterranean, where he meets strange adventures and, I don't know, giants and cyclopses and Sibyllus and various others. Okay, this is the Odyssey, about Odysseus' way back home to Ithaca after the destruction of Troy. Then you have the three Latins here. Virgil, okay, Virgil, the Aeneid, which in a way recounts the story of the only Trojan, well, not the only, but one of the Trojan survivors, Aeneas, who together with a retinue of some friends escapes from burning Troy and wants to find a new home for him and the few people that are left, okay, including his father and his wife and so on. This is basically the story about the founding of Rome, because Aeneas, after a long journey, okay, an odyssey if you like, arrives first in Carthage, where he meets Queen Dido and so on, and then leaves Carthage, goes to this peninsula, okay, which is named Italy, and there his ancestors Romulus and Remus found Rome. Okay, so this is the great epic by Virgil about the foundation of Rome. You could say probably Virgil the most important author for the Augustans. And he lived under the reign of Emperor Augustus in Rome. So, another epic poet. The two others, Ovid, he is known for various narrative poems. His most famous one is the Metamorphoses, recounting loads of story of Greek and Roman mythology. Okay, Roman mythology predominantly about gods and goddesses and how they changed shape, about Jupiter and all these things. Yeah? So if you want to know about Roman mythology, it's usually the Metamorphoses you turn to first. And Horace, more or less the lyrical poet, okay, who wrote odes, okay, odes, poems of praise, to a friend in a very lyrical manner, and he is so very influential as a lyricist in the Augustan age. Okay, yes, I don't know, inventing topoi like the carpe diem, for example. Yeah, seize the day, very influential, and so on. And also that he is cultivating satire, but we come to satire later on. Okay, so these are the main influences on the Augustans, and this is why the Augustans are called the Augustans, because they refer back to these poets here, and a few others as well, like Juvenal and Catullus, for example, but you need not all of them. Okay, let's talk about what is literature like, what is the conception of literature in the Augustan age. The most influential, of course, theorist being Aristotle. Okay, Aristotle, who wrote his Poetics, and we have dealt with part of the Poetics. His main idea, Aristotle's main idea, is of course that literature is mimesis, imitation. Okay, that literature imitates, copies life, copies reality. At least this is how he was read in those days by the Augustans. Okay, so literature, a copy of reality. It has to be believable. That's the thing. Yeah, it has to be believable. Don't make things up and so on. I mean, it has to be have to be people with psychology probably and something like that. Yeah. Okay. This is Aristotle's idea, and this was of course very influential. But even in ancient times, okay, this idea of mimesis, imitation by Aristotle, was taken up by another one we have already mentioned, by Horace, who wrote another long essay called The Art of Poetry, in Latin, of course. And there he has this line which reads in translation, "As for yourselves, thumb through and study the Greek masterpieces by day and night." So what does he mean by that? He says, he's a Latin, a Roman, okay, and he says, what you have to do in order to do the best mimesis, copy the Greeks. Okay, because they did it best. You see here? He says, I mean, mimesis, if you copy those who've done it best, okay, and if you copy them, you do the best job. And this is his thing. Basically, he said, I mean, copy Homer and other Greek poets and writers whom he knew in those days, of course. Huh? Okay. So this is his idea. And now we come to the foremost Augustan poet in England, who is Alexander Pope. Okay, 18th century poet, Alexander Pope, probably the only or the first poet who could really live by writing. Okay, a Catholic, in those days a bad thing to be, therefore he was not allowed into Oxford or Cambridge because he was Catholic. The name Pope tells you that. He was autodidactic, and he became, just through reading, probably the most intelligent man of his times. Okay, so the first half, you say, of the 18th century, Alexander Pope, and who wrote a very influential essay called Essay on Criticism, which in a way explains the Augustan English conception of literature. And I would like to study that, to read that with you. Just one part, okay? He says in his essay, "Be Homer's works your study and delight. Read them by day and meditate by night. Thence from your judgment, thence your maxims bring and trace the muses upward to their spring," which means trace your inspiration from the spring, and the spring is, of course, Homer. This is where it all comes from. Yeah? Homer is the spring. Okay? The Poeta Ductus. This is where it all derives from. "Still with his self compared, his text peruse, and let your comment be the Mantian Muse." The Mantian Muse, this you have to know, is Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid. Okay, the Mantian Muse, because Virgil was from Mantua. Yeah, he is the most influential Latin poet. So read Homer and read Virgil, he says. Okay. "And when first young Maro in his boundless mind a work to outlast immortal Rome designed, perhaps he seemed above the critic's law, and but from nature's fountain scorned to draw, but when to examine every part he came, nature and Homer were, he found, the same." And this is the catchphrase here. Yeah? Nature and Homer are the same. So Aristotle said copy reality, copy nature. Nature and reality is the same thing. Yeah? Don't underestimate that. In those days, nature and reality is the same thing. Okay? When he says nature and Homer are the same, reality and Homer are the same. So again, Homer does the best mimesis, okay, as Horace had said 1700 years before Alexander Pope. Okay? Convinced, amazed, he checks the bold design and rules as strict his labored work confine, as if the Stagirite, okay, overlooked each line. The Stagirite is Aristotle, okay? So Homer and Virgil, okay, corresponded closest to Aristotle's Mimesis, to the Stagirite. Okay, and what do we learn from that? Learn hence from ancient rule a just esteem, to copy nature is to copy them. And this last line here is the central line. Yeah? To copy nature, which means to copy reality, mimesis, is to copy them. And them is Virgil and Homer and other Augustans. Yeah? This is for you, that's important to understand. Okay? Nature and Homer are the same. Nature and Virgil are the same. Reality is the same. So the best thing you could do is, if you want to do mimesis, copy those two and others. And this is what the Augustans did. I mean, loads of poems called, something like that, imitation of Horace, imitation of Virgil, imitation of whatever. And this is why Augustan poetry is so very elitist. I mean, if you don't know your classical authors, Virgil, and Homer, and Horace, and Catullus, and you name them, it's very difficult to understand those. And this is why 18th century poetry is usually, well, not very often done in universities, because, yes, it needs a lot of contextualization, or intertext, which you need to know. This is that, okay? And imitation of Horace. This is art in itself, and you shouldn't underestimate that. Don't say they are just translators. No, they are not. If anything, they are emulators, which means they take the ancients as their role models and then make them into something new, something contemporary, something like that. Okay, that is the greatest art in the Augustan age. The greatest art is, follow the models of the ancients. To copy nature is to copy them. I would like to stop here. We go on in a second.